Hi, this is Guillermo Mash here with KZFR 90.1 FM, People Powered Radio. It's my distinct pleasure this morning. I have David Bornstein from New York City. David Bornstein is a journalist and author who specializes in writing about social innovation using a style called solutions journalism. He's written 3 books on social entrepreneurship. Welcome to the studio, David Bornstein.
Thank you, Bill.
Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, David, and the Solutions Journalism Network that you kind of run down there in New York City.
Sure. For the last 6 years, I've been writing a column with Tina Rosenberg at the New York Times called Fixes, where we look at responses to social problems and how they work and what we can learn from both failure and success. That led to the growth of this network called the Solutions Journalism Network, and we're basically a training organization. We worked with about 65 news organizations around the country, major ones, as well as some in other countries, in India and in UK and so forth, and trained about 2,000 journalists. And the basic idea is, how do you help journalists report on responses to social problems with the same level of rigor that they report on the problems? So it's not fluffy, it's not hero worshiping, it's really trying to look at how are people trying to solve problems, and what can the tools of journalism bring to that so that we can really surface more knowledge for the world in terms of understanding both what works, what doesn't work, and why.
Have you actually trained some folks in the Bay Area where I'm going to be heading?
Yeah, we've done trainings with KQED, for example. Yeah, and we worked with quite a lot of news organizations around the country, in public radio, in television, with Univision, Fusion, as well as large metro dailies, ranging from the Seattle Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Cleveland Plain Dealer. We worked with the BBC, with New Delhi TV in India. It's quite broad.
Maybe you can dive in just a little bit more on solution journalism. I kind of did a little bit of research, they kind of give you this little template, David. 1/3 describe the problem, 2/3 how you're going to solve it. Maybe you can dive in a little deeper and explain what the solutions journalism is and some of the results you've had.
Solutions journalism is just a reporting approach that says, let's look at how people are trying to respond to a problem and really look at the how-to questions of what we can learn from the effort, whether it works or not, very much grounded in evidence and research as much as it's available to show, what things are actually moving the needle and not. And the reason why it's important to have a category called solutions journalism, because some people could just say, well, that's just good journalism. That's true. We think it is. But basically, the problems scream and the solutions whisper. There's always far more attention being given to the problems and the destabilizing changes in the world that are negative, rather than the destabilizing changes in the world that are actually trying to improve things. So one is to create a category that helps people remember, let's not forget to do this, because it's often just an afterthought in the news. As most people will tell you, the news can be 24/7 sort of gloom and doom kind of stuff. The reason why it's important to do this is primarily for accountability, not for giving people inspiration or good news or anything like that. We're quite opposed to journalism being used to make people feel better. But for accountability, it's essential to know, in order to be able to say this is bad performance, you have to be able to say this is bad performance because this is possible. It's possible to do better. How do you know it's possible to do better? Well, you have to be able to report on other cities that are doing better against homelessness, other schools that are doing better against the dropout rate, and just show how they did it. Once you're able to show how people are able to move the needle on important social problems, it becomes illegitimate for other people to not do better. And so it's absolutely essential to be able to report on how people are moving the needle against problems if you want to hold people's feet to the fire. And journalism should be holding people's feet to the fire and forcing them, pressuring them to do better when it is possible to do better. And reporting should strengthen that function.
Quick question is, why is that more effective than standard journalism and reporting or even investigative journalism? What's some of the things that make it a better hook for holding people to the fire on social issues?
Because what's usually missing with a lot of investigative journalism, and of course investigative journalism is absolutely essential, most investigative journalism begins with the premise that what's missing from the public conversation is awareness about the problem or even outrage about the problem. And very often, if you read the reports, they're designed to show you how terrible something is so that you'll really get, worked up about it, and you'll say, this is urgent, we really need to fix this. But what's often missing is, well, what are we doing about this? What are other communities doing? What are the ideas currently on the table, and which ones are actually moving the needle and why? Based on very clear metrics of evidence, based on research, observation, all of the things that journalists, all of the kinds of research journalists do in order to be able to substantiate any of the reports that they do. It basically rounds out, our tagline is the whole story. It basically rounds out your coverage. In any social issue, if you take the high school dropout rate in many communities, there are communities that are ignoring that problem. There are communities that are making matters worse through regressive discipline, for example. And then there are communities that are responding to that problem, but not really very effectively, sort of in a half-hearted way. And then there are communities that are actually, or schools that are actually responding and actually showing progress. For the public to be able to understand what to expect from their institutions, you have to have all of these things covered. You have to know what bad actors look like, what negligence looks like, but you also have to know what competence looks like. Otherwise, you don't have the information. You don't have a feedback system that actually works.
Folks are just joining. We're talking with David Bornstein from the Solutions Journalism Network. And, I'm going to just kind of push back a little bit or just ask a quick question, because I'm kind of at my own term, drive-by journalism. It happens so much in homelessness. They've got some little issue that might have happened and they get all this coverage and then you never hear from them again. And a lot of the folks in San Francisco have kind of got a feel for maybe that's what's going to happen with this blanket coverage. So is there kind of like a corrective network that's built into this, your discipline for solutions journalism that says, hey, you're writing this beautiful piece of solutions journalism, but we expect you to follow this story to some level of results instead of printing one article and maybe a quick follow-up and moving on to the next thing?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the long tail for many stories is the problem-solving efforts around it. You draw a lot of attention to the issue of homelessness in one day, but in fact, the efforts to solve homelessness around the country, there's many of them, and they unfold over time, and we don't necessarily know what's going to work and what's tried. One of the most important things about the model of solutions journalism is that problems may be local, but efforts to solve problems often have a global or a very widespread impact. For example, certain cities that are able to show that they've dramatically increased the rates by which they house chronically homeless people or youth or families in homelessness, it's important for San Francisco to know what are other communities around the United States doing, who's been moving the needle, who hasn't, and how have they done it. Because cities can learn from each other much more quickly. So that's one thing. You have to be able to follow these things over time and see, some things that look very promising, you can report on them and say, this is a really good idea. You come back a year later and you discover it didn't work or didn't work as well as people hoped, or part of it worked and part of it didn't. What's interesting about these stories is that they're kind of like detective stories. The public really engages with them. Research has shown that when stories help you understand a problem, but also help you understand what are the different ways people are trying to respond to that problem. What do we know about the results that they're getting and what we can learn from it? Those stories tend to be much more engaging. People will stay with them longer on the page. They will report after reading them that they're more likely to share them. They're even more likely to get involved in trying to solve problems. People need on-ramps. There's too much negative news in the world, and it doesn't have the effect of causing people to roll up their sleeves and say, I'm going to solve the problems. It causes people to go watch Scandal and eat a pint of ice cream on the couch. It causes people to tune out. Journalism shouldn't cause people to be opt-outs of society. It should engage people and help them see very critically what's needed, what we need to solve, but also what are the tools that we have at any point in time that we can work with. And if we don't give people both those pieces of information, we're going to cause them to disengage from the commons and just to focus on their own private lives, which is exactly what we're seeing, by the way. Journalism has been feeding us for 40 years. It's one of the reasons why we have the Trump candidacy, because so many people are so disgusted with the world, but they don't see how much creative, competent problem solving is happening all around them every day. If they saw that, they might actually say, you know what, there are things we can do, rather than trying to vote a lunatic into the White House.
David Bornstein, that was just awesome. Most of the times I kind of go, you have any final comments? I mean, I'll do that, but I mean, you really wrapped this up in a nice little tidy 10-minute piece. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the point that solutions journalism is not about reporters advocating or championing particular solutions or proposing solutions. It's really about reporting. It's journalists going out there and using their skills as reporters to look at how people are trying to respond to problems, how people are trying to solve problems, and what we can learn from them. It's really based on research, going out into the field, looking at the different models that are available, both in your city or in other cities, and then coming back and trying to understand which ones appear to be moving the needle and why, based on classic, good, investigative or explanatory reporting. It's not about advocating or proposing solutions.
Thanks, David Bornstein.